the link between growth and immigration, unpicking the confusion. This is an excellent, easily read little article which really helps to explain things. It's from the London School of Economics, and it's from Professor Alan Manning, who was the chairman of the Migration Advisory Committee, which is an independent body that advises the government. And he's taking a very fair look at the question of GDP, and he's pointing out the realities, the sort of realities that I just mentioned there. He says, but on the relationship between immigration and growth, I think much comment is deeply confused. The root of the confusion is what we mean by growth. Growth might mean an increase in gross domestic product, the total amount of goods and services produced in the economy. Because immigration means more people and more people means a bigger economy, immigration almost certainly increases growth in this sense, but we normally think of growth as being desirable because it represents an improvement in the material standard of living. Then GDP per capita, which is to say per person, is a much better measure of growth, and the relationship between immigration and growth more complicated, as immigration raises GDP but also raises the capita bit of the formula, by which he means it increases the number of people living here. And then he does some very interesting examples. Before the pandemic disrupted the economy, UK GDP per capita was 33,700. An extra immigrant will raise GDP per capita if their contribution is above this figure, and they will reduce it if it is below. Now, that's important. And as he points out, therefore, using this measure, immigration is no longer necessarily pro-growth because it depends. It depends on the earning power of the immigrant. Assessing the contribution of migrants to GDP is critical to deciding whether more open immigration rules raise or reduce GDP per capita. And he continues that one contribution of immigration to GDP is the earnings of the migrants themselves, but their work also generates profits. Labor income, by which he means the earnings of the actual person, is about 60% of the total GDP income, meaning that 60p in earnings generates £1 in GDP on average. Therefore, if a migrant's earnings generate the same profit per pound as the average, this would mean that any single migrant earning above 20k would raise GDP per capita. Now, what he means by that is if you earn just over 20,000, then in total you generate just over 33,000 in the wider economy for the GDP figure, which is around what would be needed to keep the GDP per capita figure stable or slightly increasing at the assumed 33,700 up here. Then he goes on, but if the migrant has a non-working partner and child, they would have to earn over 60,000 to raise GDP per capita. Therefore, rules on rights to bring dependents, which are rarely discussed, make a big difference for the impact of immigration on GDP per capita. So immigration itself isn't going to automatically raise GDP per capita. It depends how much is that immigrant going to earn, and does that immigrant have dependents? And if they have dependents, then they're going to have to earn an awful lot, way more than the average salary. They're going to have to earn at least 60k if they're going to benefit the economy in any way. Well, how many people do you know that earn 60k a year, let alone immigrants? He also speaks about the settlement rules here, the effects of migration on GDP per capita may be more positive in the short run than in the long run, because initially the migrants are on work permits and they have to work. But if they settle, some will end up out of work just like everyone else and will eventually retire. So settlement rules, again rarely discussed, matter for the impact of immigration on growth. And then he concludes at the bottom here. He concludes, the bottom line from his report, which he offered to the government, was that the impact of a well-chosen immigration policy on growth, economic growth, was very small unless one focused on total GDP, which is the wrong measure anyway. For high-skilled immigrants, it is likely that GDP per capita is raised, but for lower-skilled immigrants, it is much more debatable. And he points out something that's so important. A lot of the current discussion is about reducing restrictions on immigration to address labor shortages in sectors like agriculture and hospitality, where productivity and salaries are low. So there's so much to consider as far as GDP is concerned, including the income of the immigrants, how long they're going to be here for, and indeed what sectors that they're going to be in, and whether they have dependents or not.